It is time for the second episode of my backlinking podcast. I am still playing a little bit around with the name because I've gotten some great name suggestions, especially one coming from my Discord channel. So I will be playing a little bit around with the name, what I will be calling it, and how I will do the intro. But in today's podcast episode, I wanted to talk about releases and updates and new features because I recently saw the video on Two's channel where Parker, the developer, talked about all of the features he released, which is just wild. I think it was 74 features or so, something close to that. It was so many features. It is wild, and things like Craft has released a lot this year. There are many other applications that have released a lot of new features. I know it because I spend a lot of time doing videos on new features, and um, especially the last couple of months in 2024, last year, there was just so many things happening that it was really hard to keep up. I couldn't. I tried as hard as I could, but there was no way of keeping up. And that brings me to my questions. So, how much should we expect from our different note taking productivity applications, especially note taking and all-in-one applications? How many features should we expect? That is the first thing. And the second thing is that with our expectations, is it really hard to actually start a new good note-taking app in 2025? Because I see some upcoming ones, like Constella is a fun one in the visual space, and there is a lot of things happening in the visual space. Noti is another one. But when I look at these applications and when I review them, the bar is set so high, both when it comes to the features you should have when you go to market and when you try to acquire new customers. Like, there is a certain amount of features that is expected, and a lot of people don't want to use an application with that set of features. One of the main ones that has been really big lately, that more and more applications are going towards, is offline, which I completely understand. But there are, in my opinion, some things that you will need to sacrifice if you're going to jump from one application to another. But more on that later. The thought process behind this podcast episode and the idea I had around new features is, how much do we expect? Because just to take Milanote as an example, so I went into the Milanote subreddit, which I unfortunately spent too much time inside of different subreddits for note-taking applications. But I went in there, and this was right when I was considering moving because I was renewing my whole productivity system. One of the main things being that I needed offline, and Milanote did not have that. But I went in there and I saw a lot of posts talking about Milnote has only released one new feature this year, or two, or three, or whatever the number was. One of the main things Milnote did was actually to improve the overall application and make it faster, but people were really unhappy with not seeing a new feature, which I understand somewhat, because it is really easy to have this feeling of falling behind, of just the fear of missing out simply because your note-taking or productivity application does not have the newest features or the features that many other applications have. I think this also happened back when Mem first was released. Now they're coming with 2.0. I think it's 5 or 6 days from the day I will be posting this. But it is coming the 15th of January. That's when we will get Mem 2.0. And when Mem first was released, I think we had a lot of the same things. I wasn't that deep into the productivity space, but I've read up and I've been through a lot of different YouTube videos, Twitter accounts. It is called X now, but and also Reddit and subreddits. So I think the same thing happened there. Like we got a promise of a new type of application, so people jumped. I had one person that I read jumped from Notion to Mem, and a couple of years later, Mem is releasing their 2.0 and have had their struggles and trying to figure out what they want to become. Meanwhile, Notion is getting a lot of the same features that you would otherwise have in Mem, mainly the chat feature. But you also have things like Reflect, which now has it as well. Cascade, I think, has some AI features, not exactly the same, but there are things like that, features like that, that we will end up having in every note-taking application. But I completely understand feeling like you're sort of falling behind, you're missing out on something amazing. And this comes back to shiny new tool syndrome, which I will talk about in another podcast episode. But my thought around this is that I think we sometimes, especially me as a person who reviews different applications, I may sometimes set the bar too high for new applications. Like, I remember this video I did on Scrintl, where I talked about how terrible Scrintl was as an application. I had to then go back, try Scrintl a little bit more because I got a few comments around Scrintl and uh, that I was wrong. People thought I was completely off with my review, so I gave it another chance, and I figured out that I was way too strict because I put so much emphasis on a mobile application, which sort of is to be expected, but like I understand that you can't deliver a mobile application on your 0.22 version, but we've seemed to come to a place where we expect those things. I still do. I still would love for Scrintl to have a mobile application. And like we have applications like Tools that keeps on adding new features, but that isn't the norm because that is really hard to do, especially on a small team. I I'm not sure if Parker gets enough sleep. I will have to ask him. But the point is that like not every single application can add so many new features in a year. But it seems like the expectation is that we expect at least 3 to 4, maybe 5 new features. Hopefully, one big one, like Two's had major big ones. They had Two's Pals, which was their AI, and they also had this project management update with Kanban boards that I really liked and a gallery view that I really liked. But mm, we seem to expect at least one major one. That's my point, and maybe 3, 4 like smaller updates, which I think is a lot. And that gets me towards my next question. If that is the expectation, will it be possible for like newer upcoming applications to actually get consumers to jump over, like for example Scrintl or Constella? I think that those are a little different because they have no clear competitors. Like you have Heptabase, but everyone does not fit inside of one visual note-taking app. So we have a bit of space in the visual note-taking space. That was a weird sentence. We have space in the visual note-taking space. I will need to rewrite my scripts going forward. But my point is that in the visual note-taking space, there is a room for a lot of new applications because there aren't too many right now. But in the like other aspects of note taking, like we have Notion, we have Craft, we have Coda, which is now a part of Grammarly. Noteplan now has databases. like so many different applications are in that all-in-one database style. Obsidian can do that as well. Add databases. We have Anytype now, which is growing, but that is another good example. Like in the last quarter of the year, Anytype did not release any new or major features, and I said that Anytype's development is going really slow, which isn't true because they've added a lot of new things in 2024. But I ended up saying because there wasn't any major like updates in Q4, I ended up saying in my end of year review that I feel like the development is going a little slow, which isn't actually true, and it brings me back to like especially me as someone who reviews applications. I've seen other people say the same thing as I do, so it isn't just me, but especially me as someone who reviews applications. Like, what how much should you expect when someone is building software? Like, how many new things should you expect in one quarter? Like, do I need one major like new feature or new update in order for me to think that the development is going fast enough? I'm not really sure like what expectations would be right. So please do comment down below if you're watching on the YouTube. I think Spotify has comments now as well, but do comment if you have any thoughts around that. What is like not necessarily an acceptable amount of updates, but what do you expect when you use a note-taking application? Let's say you've used the same one for 2 to 3 years. How many updates do you actually want? Because I'm a little conflicted. I want my applications to add something from time to time, but I prefer the approach that like Supernotes took last year when they did their, I think it was the 3.1, where they just released a bunch of new features together. It wasn't anything like completely changing the application, because that is something I don't want. I don't want updates every single month or year that makes me have to like change the way I'm using the application, like restructure everything. I don't want that at all. And that is also why I often do not recommend newer applications or applications that aren't fully out yet, simply because they will change and you will have to adapt the way you use the application. Many of the applications I'm looking at today, just as an example, Craft isn't the same application as the Craft we had last year or a couple of years ago. The same goes for Notion, the same goes for Tools, even though I think Tools is pretty much the same except for the Kanban and the list emojis, which aren't something that will change the way you use the application. Uh, my point is that I don't necessarily want new huge updates all the time, but I would really like an application to fix minor issues that you see, like minor problems, moving something to make it a little bit easier for me to use the application, a better navigation bar, things like that. I would like to see often, because the other aspect of it is something like walling, which has a whole story behind it, but Walling hasn't released anything, and they will soon, but they have not released anything. They haven't fixed bugs, and that is also an issue. So where is the sweet spot of updates, and how much should we expect from our applications? How much should we expect from these applications that, especially for us in the productivity community, are really important and what vital to the things we do. Like, if you take away my Todoist, my twos, especially my twos, and you take away my Squintle right now, my life will quickly fall apart, at least a little bit, because I will no longer have control of the things I have to do, of how my projects are going, of any ideas I have. I won't have my journal to look back on things, like just as simple as I've struggled with some stomach issues and I've written everything inside of Toost, and whenever I go to the doctor, I just deliver him that list of my symptoms, and it has worked great. I will lose that. Like, for us in the productivity space, these applications are really important to us. And then the question becomes, like, what should we expect from them? And I won't go too deep into this last thing here, but then the question becomes, should we have to pay for our applications when our expectations are this high? Should we actually have to pay for them? And the price might vary. Like, I choose to pay for Twos because it gives me a lot of value, and I think that it gives me so much value that it deserves some form of compensation for that. Um, that is like my thought process behind payment. And I've also talked about applications being too expensive, but I won't go too deep into that. The idea here is how much is, like, how much are we expecting from our productivity applications, and how much should we expect? And then I will probably do another podcast episode on note-taking apps should not be free. But this episode, and probably the couple of next episodes as well, will be a little bit all over the place until I get a hang of this podcasting in English, because I can see my script, but I can't always follow my script. So I will have to practice. But just like with my YouTube videos, they've gotten a lot better. So will my podcast, hopefully. As usual, thank you so much for watching today's video. And if you have any questions, do leave them down below. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope to see you again quite soon. Or I hope that you will hear my voice again quite soon.